that that is absolutely a horrendous circumstance, because the very purpose of using FISA is to get information to the court so they can make a reasoned judgment. And it's not up to the case agent or anybody in the chain of command to alter that information, to manipulate it, to try and achieve that goal. The information has to be based on valid inquiry to determine if it was factual, and present it to the court on that basis, not manipulated in any way.
Buck, in your tenure at the FBI, you signed FISA applications in your tenure? Yeah. Right. Many of them, I would say. Is that accurate?
That's true.
Did you ever sign a FISA application associated with a presidential campaign?
No.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I did conduct an investigation as SAC in Dallas of a potential infiltration of a campaign and the allegation of use of a wiretap against Ross Perot when he was running against and we were very careful how we approached that, and the decisions on where we went and how we went up to the Attorney General before we did them. So that's the kind of sensitive approach you have to take, because you're meddling in an area which is both sensitive and also essential in the process of the U.S. government.
Now, Buck, based on this latest statement I read to you from the Inspector General, that this material was already in the hands of the FBI, showing that there was inaccurate information that was in this FISA. Again, I'm a novice at this, but it's my understanding that when you sign off on a FISA application, I believe Comey did the first three, and on the last one was McCabe and Rosenstein, you're verifying that the information is accurate, correct, and that and you do that under penalty of perjury, correct?
Yeah, and that is, you have to rely on your subordinates to make sure they've done their job. Obviously, the deputy director can't go out and personally verify all the facts, but you have to be sure that when you present them, that it is a proper and authenticated portrayal of information that's been collected.
So it's not a far statement. It's not off the rails to say that the people who signed these FISA applications, if the Inspector General has determined that this information was inaccurate and readily available and in the hands of the FBI and not some obtuse stuff that just came out after they had this stuff, one would think that the people who signed those applications, which the Justice Department has already come out and said the third and fourth FISAs were absolutely fraudulent, and 1 and 2 are still under investigation, but the IG reports that there are problems there. One would think that the people who signed these are actually on the hook. Am I wrong in that assessment?
If they knowingly provided or presented false information, or they failed to bring up information that was relevant to the process, yes, certainly they'd be on the hook.
And apparently, according to the IG report, they were all in the same room together when Stuart Evans was saying, hey, folks, there's a problem here. There's a problem with this Steele character. There's a problem with the sourcing. There's a problem with who funded this thing. And McCabe is on record as saying, no, we're going to go ahead with this.
Well, then McCabe made an erroneous and improper judgment.
And
I know Andy McCabe. I met him through the Committee on Terrorism of the IACP. Thought he was a bright young man, and never heard him say anything that would have caused me to have concern about him. But in reading this and hearing about it through the IG's report, it is totally inconsistent with the proper management of the FISA process.
Buck, when you met McCabe early in his career.
Well, he wasn't there early in his career. He was a executive assistant director when I met him.
Okay, so that's not such a young pup then.
No, he was probably at that time 14, 15 years in the Bureau.
Okay, so he had his land legs. Did you came in contact with thousands of folks in the FBI. Did you see this guy as like, there's certain people you come in contact with in your profession, and I did as a surgeon. You go, man, this person is a star. This person is the real deal, the star. Did you have that feeling about McCabe?
No, I thought he was lacking in knowledge of the terrorism approach or the terrorism concerns, and hadn't been properly grounded in his background. I didn't have any inkling that he was dishonest or was committing any sort of false information, but I didn't think that he showed the kind of background and knowledge of the subject matter that he should have had in chairing a committee on terrorism amongst the law enforcement agencies.
The Crossfire Hurricane team was then merged into the special counsel's office when Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel in May of 2017. And from the Mueller report, page 13, I just want to read this, a little footnote in the bottom. Mueller report, page 13, footnote. FBI personnel assigned to the special counsel's office, I believe there were 40 FBI agents, 19 attorneys, were required to adhere to all applicable federal law and all department and FBI regulations, guidelines, and policies. An FBI attorney worked on FBI-related matters for the office, such as FBI compliance with all FBI policies and procedures, including the FBI's Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide. That FBI attorney worked under FBI legal supervision, not the special counsel's supervision. You know, when you dissect this Inspector General's report about what happened with the special counsel's team and the Crossfire Hurricane team and the FISA application, General Flynn, and you read this footnote, Buck, they were required to adhere to all applicable federal law and all department and FBI regulations guidelines. You know what, Buck? I get the feeling that didn't really occur. Am I wrong in that?
Well, I certainly would have the same opinion. I would need to get in and document it, but it would raise great concern on my part to simply read what had been done and see how it was put together.
You mentioned Andrew McCabe, and when you dealt with him, he again wasn't a puppy. He was there 14, 15 years.
At least.
Yeah. And in your assessment, not a superstar when you met him.
No, when you meet in a committee meeting and you're discussing particular subject matter, you don't get an opportunity to judge their professional competence. I just wasn't impressed that he was the best that the Bureau had to offer.
Let's turn to Robert Mueller. You know Robert Mueller. You've worked with Robert Mueller. And the Robert Mueller you worked with and knew, compare him to the Robert Mueller who testified in front of that congressional committee.
Well, I've known Bob Mueller, he pronounces it Mueller, since he was Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, which is where he was when I left Washington. And then I came in contact with him as he was FBI Director on numerous occasions, knew Bob quite well and found him to be a very capable, decisive, and forthright individual. The testimony I saw him give led me to believe that his mental capacity had been diminished, and he was not the same Bob Mueller that I knew.
He took over the reins of this investigation in May of 2017. We've established, through the Inspector General, that the FISA applications, which first went in October 2016, January 2017, April 2017, June 2017, were, needless to say, inaccurate, as the IG put it, and as the Department of Justice has said, fraudulent, at least on 3 and 4 and probably 1 and 2. Why did not, when Robert Mueller took over, Buck, in May of 2017, and reviewed these FISA applications, it was common knowledge by then, about the Steele dossier being fraudulent. Why, after day one in the office, didn't he say, put up the red flag and say, wait a minute? Wait a minute. The very foundation of this office that I've been asked to run based on this Crossfire Hurricane investigation is based on fraudulent information. This has to stop right now. Yet, Mueller allowed this to continue for several years. No,
Years?
square
years.
that for me, Buck.
Well, my understanding is when he came across the activities of the FBI personnel assigned to his office, Strzok and Page, that he immediately sent them back to the FBI. I don't know what he had access information he had as far as the ongoing counterintelligence case. If he had access to it, I would think that he would have seen that it was both improperly predicated and conducted in a, shall we say, a manner which is not consistent with the requirements of an FBI investigation.
It was very obvious during his testimony he was not knowledgeable about the facts of the investigation. Do you believe Robert Mueller was just a figurehead and the real meat of the matter was being done by these people like Andrew Weissman and these 19 attorneys? And do you think that's what occurred here?
The Mueller I knew wouldn't have allowed that to occur, but I can't explain his lack of knowledge and precision at the testimony. That to me was very alarming and disconcerting, because that's not the Mueller that I knew and worked with in the past.
Robert Mueller is an attorney, correct?
Oh, yes.
Why would you put an attorney in charge of an investigation like that rather than put an investigator like Buck Revell in charge of it?
Well, that's a determination that the Attorney General makes, and you know, all the FBI directors, only one of them before, or two of them before, have been agents, have been investigators. So they've all been lawyers, which obviously in the Justice Department, that's who is in the utmost position. But Clarence Kelly was a former agent, and Louis Freeh was a former agent. But all the rest of them have been lawyers, some federal judges like Sessions and Webster. But certainly you got to understand the process and what constitutes probable cause and reason to believe, and follow the factual basis to build a FISA warrant, because you're going before the court and swearing to these things. You've got to know that they are accurate, truthful, and properly presented.
Buck, when you signed off on FISA applications, did you actually physically did you ever go to the FISA court and present that information to a judge?
No, that was done by the agent who put together the case, and probably a representative from the Bureau and the department, and including counsel, because this process was rooted in legal review of every step along the way. That's the way it was designed to occur.
When this information was presented to the FISA court, do you find it odd that there's no documentation that the judge or judges didn't say, wait a minute, this is investigating a presidential campaign. The T's better be crossed and the I's better be dotted. And tell us about this Steele guy, and tell us where this information came from, and the, if you will, the audit trail associated with that document.
Well, the judges on the court certainly have the right to and responsibility to assure to the best of their ability that the information presented is both accurate and been properly processed. And that generally would not be documented in the Bureau files, but that should be in the FISA files that the court keeps. And actually, they don't keep the process; it's kept by the Justice Department on their behalf. So yes, if I was a FISA judge, I would want to know those things, and certainly be given any shortage of indication that it was properly done, going back and asking questions before I signed that warrant.
And do you think some of these judges might have seen Comey's name on the first three? That he wasn't on the fourth because he had been fired by then, but that his name was on the first three and said, whoa, if the FBI director's signing off on this, well, we're going with it. Because it's my understanding, usually the FISA court sides with the approval of the process about 98% of the time.
Well, there was a reason for that, is because we were so careful in what we put forward, and it was so carefully documented that the judges came to rely on the authenticity and accuracy of the information. These are seasoned judges that are selected by the Chief Justice to serve on this special court, and they certainly are aware of the importance of their paying close attention to the details. And if they didn't ask questions on this, I think that they became too lax. They certainly should have questioned some of this information I've seen from the IG report that was very speculative and not well-grounded.
Buck, we mentioned your interactions with McCabe and Mueller. Let's talk Comey. You've had interactions with Comey.
I didn't know him when I was in the Bureau, but I knew him after he became the director, because I sat on the advisory committee that met with the director from the former Agents Association. And I met with him when he visited the Dallas area and at the IAC, International Association Chiefs of Police Conference, and several other times. And I was quite impressed. He was outgoing. He was pleasant. He seemed to be very knowledgeable. He certainly acted as though he was tremendously gratified to be in that position and wanted to do the right thing. So I was taken aback when I saw all that happened in this thing, because at the time I was said, well, Comey would not knowingly allow this kind of thing to happen.
But when you review the IG document, does it call into question what he did as director of the FBI in your mind?
I think it calls into question the adequacy of his review. When the director signs it, he's putting not only his reputation, but the reputation of the entire FBI on the line. Right. And, woe be it if I had taken a FISA into Webster or Sessions and it'd be full of holes. They should have fired me and made sure they had people that would give them the proper information and make sure it was both authentic and well documented. So the process, certainly in this case, had fallen well below the standard that would be acceptable.
And Buck, if you were FBI director, remember when Comey had that press conference about Hillary Clinton and her emails? Would that press conference had occurred if you were FBI director rather than James Comey?
No, that was improper, unauthorized, and in my view, a serious breach of departmental and FBI regulations.
Let's turn to William Barr. You've known him for years. He was the one, as I mentioned in your introduction, who sent you to L.A.
Right.
to solve the riot issue that was occurring.
Bill and I served, as he came up from Assistant Attorney General up to Associate and so forth, we served on a number of committees together. We went through a number of briefings at the highest level together. We weren't next door neighbor buddies, but we were very congenial association, and one of great trust and confidence in him, and he never gave me any reason to believe otherwise.
I've been chastised because I've supported Attorney General Barr in what he's doing and how he's doing it. Are my critics correct? Or
not in my mind. I can't think of anybody in the country I would rather have in that position with all the problems and concerns than Bill Barr. He is absolutely the right person, and I know that he doesn't always follow other people's script, but he does it the right way, the legal way, and the responsible way, and he's not going to allow it to drift away from the highest standards of process. And all the flack that he's gotten because he has done part of his job, which is to oversight and review of the actions of underlings, including local U.S. attorneys and so forth. That's exactly what he's supposed to be doing.
And you have faith in him?
I do indeed. I would, if if I was going out of a foxhole and had him beside me, I'd trust him.
And is there anyone else you'd rather see as Attorney General other than Bill Barr at this point?
No, I think Bill probably is as well qualified and is as substantial a person as I have come across in my 50 years now of involvement in the criminal justice system.
Buck, you're also networked with, let's call them alumni of the FBI.
Yes.
When you speak to your fellow alumni of the FBI that has served in the FBI and served our country for years, decades in many cases, what's the feedback that occurs about what's transpired with the FBI over the past 3 or 4 years and the revelations, whether it's with the Flynn case or Crossfire Hurricane, the IG report, and the like?
I'd say 99% are chagrined, embarrassed, and concerned about what has happened to the organization that they gave their life to, and that's across the board. I don't know of anybody who was of the rank of agent in charge or assistant director or higher that doesn't believe that the people involved here let the Bureau and the American public down. And there's tremendous chagrin on their part, and they're looking to see the course corrected. And that's the reason they are all applauding the Attorney General going back into and looking at these things to determine if there's not actions that should be taken or should have been taken to put the ship back on course and to make sure that both the Bureau and the Department were acting in the highest standards of ethics and legal responsibility.
I'm not trying to be cruel by saying this, Buck, but there's a big chunk of the American population, based on all this that's come out, that they don't trust the FBI anymore.
I understand that. That's one of the reasons that my contemporaries and all of the graduates of the Bureau are so concerned, because the FBI cannot function, literally, unless it has the trust and confidence of the American public.
So, Buck, we're going to draft you to now
right.
in charge of oversight and if you will, taking the patient out of the ICU and helping them gain their health back, the patient being the FBI. What would be some of the first things Buck Revell would do to right the ship?
Well, first, you absolutely, totally cooperate with the review process that the Attorney General has established, and make sure that they got all the information and access that they need to be able to get to the bottom of any of these aberrations or problems, and then be available to them to respond as far as any Bureau responsibilities that they're concerned about. I think that the Director Ray is of that mind. I've talked with him. I know that he is. People say, well, he's not aggressive enough. Well, he's not in a position to be aggressive. He has to wait to get all the facts and then act upon them. Now, he did remove Strzok, and then he acted on the firing of Strzok. He did act on McCabe, and he will act, in my mind, from what I've seen and heard and talked with him about, as he's presented with the information, he will take appropriate actions to make sure that the entire system is purified and back on track. And by the way, he has the confidence of the Attorney General and vice versa. So they've got a good working relationship there.
So there are many people that are very questionable about Director Ray. You're not one of those people.
I've seen no reason to be so far. And, just like Comey went out and gave this unauthorized press conference, well, Comey can't do that and shouldn't do that. So he's got to wait until the process goes forward and then take the appropriate action when he's in a position to do so.
Buck, when you started your career with the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover was the director.
Yes, he was.
And when you came back to headquarters if I remember correctly, you had about a 3-hour meeting with J. Edgar Hoover.
I did.
Tell us about J. Edgar Hoover.
Well, of course, he was a legend at that time. So as a young supervisor going in, I expected a welcome to Washington, go back and do your work. And for some reason, of course, I'm a former Marine, and I talked with him about some issues like that because he was interested. And he wanted to know if FBI agents should be sent through boot camp. And I said, no, if you want to keep any of them, you don't. In any case, we had a very long conversation about 90-10, 90% him and 10% me as far as comments. But it covered everything from the mafia and the Kennedy assassination to right on up to the ongoing activities at the time, which included the anti-war activities and things that had happened to the Bureau in the Weather Underground process, including the burglary at the resident agency in Philadelphia. He told me something very amazing. He told me that he told the president personally that he had to give up his liaison with Judith Campbell Exner. So he went directly to the president and told him that he was being sandbagged by people who had brought Exner into his orbit.
And that would be actually somebody we spoke about earlier in this interview. It was
yes.
Good old Sam Giancana.
Yeah, but it went through Peter Crawford, the president's brother-in-law.
Peter Lawford.
Lawford, yeah.
Lawford. Yeah.
The president didn't talk to Giancana, but Hoover, indicated he told the president that he had to cease and desist any contact. The president said, "Okay, Mr. Hoover, I understand," and that was the end of it. And I asked Mr. Hoover, I said, "Well, did you think that that put an end to it?" And he said, "Oh, yes, it put an end to it." So obviously he had followed up to make sure that the White House wasn't being infiltrated with operatives from the Sam Giancana mafia, the La Cosa Nostra in Chicago.
Overall impression of Hoover?
I think he built a great organization and then stayed too long because he became very stilted in his method of operations. He became overly directive towards minutia, and I just think had stayed too long, and his later tenure, which he died just before Watergate, had become problematic. But during Watergate, the organization he had put together responded magnificently and diligently, and essentially brought that. I've heard of Woodward and Bernstein getting the credit. They caused most of the problems, and they certainly didn't develop most of the information. So the organization that he had created stood up to tremendous pressure from the White House and the CIA and elsewhere, and made sure the investigation was done right. And then we were fortunate to have a judge that took the case and took it right down the middle the way it should have.
Buck, I'd like to thank you for being so generous with your time today. I'd also like to thank you for your service to our country. I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You are an incredible freedom fighter and patriot, and our country is so much better for all that you have done and continue to do, and I thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, this is Dave Janda signing off. Until next time, again, thanks for joining us today. Dream big and dare to fail.